grateful to be here. As usual, I'm talk saying this is how I'm feeling today. Let's see how I feel as I continue. But welcome back to another episode of Soul Speak. Thank you all so much for your support, for your feedback, for your streams, downloads, for the love. Thank you so much. And today I wanted to welcome you back to the segment called Dysfunctional Storytelling Time. I've really been meaning to tell you guys this story for a while now, but I didn't get a chance to. This is about the time that I got into a physical fight with my grandfather. Yes. I said those words, they still don't sit quite well when I put these words together, but it is true, y'all. When I was about 16 years old, I got into a physical fight with my grandfather. And so let's go down the road. So, I had a tumultuous childhood. And by the time I was with my grandparents, I was 11 years old. And that was after I came from foster care. And the reason I was in foster care is because I was molested by my stepfather. So I started living with my grandparents after foster care because my mother still lived with the husband that had molested me. So basically, there was no place for me at her home. This is the foundation of me living with my grandparents. So I started living there when I was 11 years old. And my grandparents, I have to say they did the best that they could. The best that they could wasn't the greatest for me, but the onus wasn't really on them. But anyway, they did what they could with what they knew how, which was not satisfactory for me. They were, of course, old school. I find that the old school is more strict, and they were. I wasn't allowed outside, although I found ways to make it there. And this is part of my creativity. I had to make up stuff. But it was a really restrictive lifestyle. From 11 to 17 years old, you can imagine I was budding from preteen into full teenagehood, and I had a personality that basically could not be contained. And the teenage years with the hormones coming out, it was not going to be a good meeting of the minds for people who weren't trying to meet any minds with me. So my grandfather and I especially had a tumultuous relationship. He was headstrong, as was I. He was aggressive as I could be, or I felt I had to learn how to be because I needed to protect myself. The adults in my life primarily were not around to protect me. I learned early on. So how I took this on for myself is I became the protective person I needed. And whoever was around, whoever it was that was violating my senses, be damned. So my grandfather and I clashed often. He had colorism going on. And I remember on one occasion when he said that my grandmother and I looked alike. My grandmother is really, really dark. And growing up, I thought I was really, really dark. She was one of my more favored people because she wasn't aggressive with me, how my grandfather was. So I was able to see her more as a loving source, even though she had her stuff with her. She was the one that I preferred. And my grandfather at one point said, you two are alike. That's why you like each other or something like that. You know, you have the same skin color. And I remember saying to him, and this had to be like at 12 years old, I was like, I'd rather look like her than you. And so you can just imagine the type of back and forth that I would engage in as I got older. My grandfather didn't hold back any punches. I didn't hold back any punches. And while I viewed it as taking up for myself, which I was, it was also very, very toxic for me and infiltrated me in a way that I only recognized as I got older. So that's how it was to live in this household. And again, I started living there from the age of 11. So by the time I was 16, I was fed the F up, basically. And it was a morning. I was on my way to school. And I don't remember the comment that my grandfather made, but I assure you, from early on living there, this was the day I was waiting for. So he said something. I either ignored him. I think I ignored him because it was like too early in the morning to be bothered. And he somehow managed to hit my leg or kick something. Now, my grandfather, he didn't used to hit me. That wasn't a part of his pattern. And I think it's because I was so abrasive with him. But that day he did. And it wasn't something hard. Not that I deserved it, but it was the straw that broke the camel's back. At that point, had he blown in my ear, he would have gotten the same reaction. So we got into a full-blown fisticuff. And my grandmother was there yelling and screaming and upset. I remember either she said she's going to call the cops or somebody called the cops, but the cops came. And I was petrified because I'd never dealt with the authorities. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to prison. I didn't regret what I did, though, because enough was effing enough already. So my grandfather had pulled my hair. I had scratched the crap out of his eyes. And it was what it was. So the cops came over and it was a classic good cop, bad cop. I think it was a white cop and a Hispanic cop. And if I'm not mistaken, the good cop was the white cop. I don't know if it was a tactic, if they were really going to arrest me, but my grandmother didn't want to press charges. I was scared, but there was also a level of don't give a fuck in the situation. Because again, I was sick and tired of this abuse, of this verbal assault that I had been dealing with since I was 11 years old. I was done. So, yeah. So my grandmother wound up not pressing charges. The cops left. I think I went to school. I think I went to school that day because I didn't stay in the house because I didn't want to be there. If I didn't go to school, I definitely left the house. And by the time I came back that night, basically my grandfather he called my mother and let her know that I couldn't stay there. And that was a moment of relief and a moment of panic for me, because throughout my childhood, I was sexually abused from 6 to 8, and I went into foster care. And it wasn't something that I was prepared for or that I was pretty much told. I was put into foster care. Once I was in foster care, my mother didn't visit me often. And there was an air, I don't know how I received it, and it could be afterwards that I was told this, but I pretty much think it was during foster care that, like, I knew I wasn't being supported by my family, that they did not believe me. So there were traces of abandonment throughout my life. And when I went to my grandparents' house, I for sure know that my family didn't believe me. So it was always a sense of being tolerated and that I was a burden instead of being loved and cared for. There was never a sense of that. But that emotion of being abandoned once again rose within me. But I did go on to live with my mother, and believe it or not, it was her, she was still with her husband at the time, the same man who had sexually abused me. So you can imagine how scary that was for me. And at that point, I was 17 into 18. I wound up living with my mother for a year. I'll save that story for another time. But I say this story because growing up, I was made to feel ashamed of what I told, the abuse that I was vocal about. I was made to be ashamed of that. I was treated as if I messed up the family, to be honest. And all of that culminated into me having a fight with my grandfather. And a lot of times we hear about young adults, children having these tumultuous, I would say, character spasms, is what I would call them. You hear about how a teenager is misbehaving or they're acting out. And 9 times out of 10, it's for a reason. And it's because something is happening to them. And I remember feeling assaulted by everyone in my life, including people who were hearing the news from the outside. Of course, they were being told by my parents. And for all intents and purposes, everybody looked at it from a standpoint of, wow, how misbehaved of a kid that is. And that's how I was treated. Like I was a miscreant and I would amount to nothing. And I was doing all of this for no reason. Meanwhile, I was the one being abused and being abused from early on. So, yeah, I say that to say, if ever you are in a position when you're hearing a parent or a family member give you an account of how a teenager is behaving, I ask you to challenge that parent or that adult as to what is really going on. Whether they answer you or not is a different story. Maybe in some instances, not bringing it up may be better, but in your mind, in the crevice of your mind, have that there is likely a reason why that kid is behaving that way. Because my family for a long time painted me with a brush that did not represent who I was at all. And I still have a reputation because I don't take people's shit. I really don't. But I know that there are so many beautiful parts of me that was never honored, that I didn't believe were beautiful until I really received reinforcement by strangers in my life. And it's unfortunate. But yeah, this is a story basically to give the other side some light of what it might mean to be a quote unquote misbehaved teen, the black sheep of the family, and just basically to be that ostracized person who is often misrepresented. And with that, I will say I have been Rachel. Thank you so much for listening to this crazy story. I have a lot of them. And I look forward to hearing your feedback. You can like, follow, subscribe, share. You can follow me on Instagram as soulspeak_podcast or my personal Instagram page, The Sassy Rachel. You can find this podcast on Spotify, iTunes, and you can find me on YouTube now on actual camera. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy, and speak to you again. Bye.